Sorry about that. Took me a while to find the right cue card. Okay, so as you just saw, this is pre-recorded. And also, as you're seeing right now, I am not Rev Melissa. I am sekouwrites. I am her producer, and I am guest spotting for her today on Sunday. What's today's date? Sunday, the 27th of February. Wow, the month is almost over. So this show is Living Life in Joy. And when I when I do these guest spots, it's always a surprise to you what I'm going to do. But this time, it's a surprise to me what I'm going to do. I've gone back and forth about what I'm going to do for today's episode. And ultimately, I decided to take a page from Rev Melissa's book and just hit the record button and see what happens. Yikes. So I kind of have a sense of what I want to say, what I want to do, but I don't know. I don't know how it's going to work out. But I'm stepping out on faith and trusting that all will be well for today. Okay, so just again, this is Living Life in Joy. I'm your guest host. I'm sekouwrites. This is the 27th day of February, and I do not have a guest today. I had a guest, but some things happened, and I'm moving in a different direction, and I'm going to see what comes through. So the general idea that I have for today is to talk about Black History Month in a different way. So as you know, if you've been watching my show and Rev Melissa's show, I've done just a little bit of Black history for Black History Month. I screened my documentary short, Test Driving While Black, on Rev Melissa's show, actually on this show, on Living Life in Joy, earlier this month. And other than that, I haven't done much for Black History Month. And I've been thinking all month about what to do. And so what I decided to do for today is talk about my personal interaction with some Black history moments, because I think that sometimes we interact with Black History Month as if it's off and away somewhere. Like these are stories about people who typically are in the past and sometimes are in the present, but generally there's this sense of distance. And I want to close that distance by talking about some of my personal interactions with race as it relates to Black History Month. Because, I mean, the point really, to me, the point of Black History Month is to encourage diversity in terms of appreciating our differences and appreciating that there are differences, that we're not all the same, that our life experiences are not all the same, and that our experiences in America are not all the same. And so understanding those differences, I think, is really important. So all that said, I'm gonna dive into it. So I thought I would first mention Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson is the inventor of Black History Month. I just learned this from my stepmom, actually. She did a Black History Month presentation exactly a week ago at church here in Florida, where I'm on location. And I learned from her that Carter G. Woodson invented Black History Month in 1926. It was a week when it was first invented. It was called Negro History Week. Let me get it. Yes, the first Negro History Week was created by Carter G. Woodson in 1926. He chose February, ironically, because that month contains the birthdays of President Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. That's why he chose February. It had nothing to do with the number of days in the month, as people often say. And then over time, it grew from a week to encompassing a whole month. So I think that's an important thing for all of us to know, just generally about Black History Month. And that said, I'm going to do a couple timeline mentions because, again, I'm closing the distance gap. So I've got a moment from my mom's history and then from my history, and then a few more from my history. So my mom tells this story all the time about how when she was teaching in, I believe it was Amherst, but anyway, she was teaching and she had X number of students on the roster. Let's just say it was like 20 students, but 200 students showed up. And so at some point during that first class, she asked the class what was going on. Why was there this discrepancy between the number of students that she had listed and the number that showed up? And there was kind of awkward silence for a while. And then finally, someone piped up and said, "We just came to see a Black PhD because we've never seen one before." So that's not far removed. That's just my mom. That's not like ages and eons ago. That's just, recently. And the idea that a Black PhD might look like something different than any other PhD is kind of odd. And it just it just shows you that we haven't moved as far as we think we've moved. I think that's the point. Like that that yes, there's been lots of progress in a lot of different areas, but underneath underneath our pleasant demeanors are often ideas about African Americans that don't jibe with our reality. So yeah, so my mom has a PhD, and growing up in that world, I'm growing up with all her friends who are PhDs and who are also African American. So that was my life experience, and I didn't think that anyone would find that unusual. But I remember much later in life, I was listening to these two white guys talking, and they were talking about the Cosby Show and how unrealistic it was for a Black lawyer to be married to a Black doctor and have that Huxlow's lifestyle. And I was like, that's just my life. Like that's what I know. So anyway, so there's that moment, and segueing from that to one of my own in the professional world. I used to work for Time Incorporated, which, as you know, is a huge conglomerate, owns lots of different magazines. And I was the first Black employee on the executive floor. Now, I was not an executive. Let's be clear about that. I was not an executive. I was an assistant to an executive, but I was the first. At the time, I was the only Black male employee on the floor. There was another Black woman on the floor. She was the receptionist for the entire floor, and I was the first Black assistant to an executive at that level. And I remember on one of my first days, it was definitely my first week, one of the other executives came by to see the executive that I worked for. And I'm, typical arrangement. I had an office in front of her office. So you had to go through my office, past my desk to get into the inner sanctum, as it were. And he walked in and he looked at me for a second. And he said, "Are you here to fix the computers?" which I was not, but even more telling, that floor, the executive floor, had an IT department. Like the whole building, all the different companies under the umbrella of Time Inc. didn't all have tech departments. It was kind of a universal tech department for the whole building. But the executive floor, they had their own tech team and an office on that floor with a tech team. There's one guy, and primarily one guy and his assistant, but he was responsible for all the tech stuff on that floor. So doubly unlikely that I would be there to fix the computer, since there's a tech team on the floor, which with a known person who does the tech stuff for that floor. So again, we're not talking about a lot of time past. We're talking about something that happened relatively recently. And there were many other experiences I had working at that level, on that floor, in that company, that, yeah, were challenging to say the least. So anyway, that's another personal moment. And now I'll move on to a different category. I'll move into arts. So Ntozake Shange is the creator of the play For Color Girls Who've Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Isn't Enough. It's a long title, but you've probably heard it before, because it's been turned into a Broadway show and it's been turned into a movie. So there's been lots of exposure for it. But I just want to mention the fact that she invented the term choreo poem, which is what that play is called. It's called a choreo poem. And I didn't know until relatively recently that she invented that term. So she is literally the first person to ever create a choreo poem, because she created the word choreo poem. And choreo poem means that it's all these things mixed together. It's poetry, it's spoken word, it's dance, it's movement, it's all these different things collected together in a single piece. And I have modeled my own play, Brown Boy Mad, after her play. And I also call mine a choreo poem. And so the only point there is that she's a recent first, because that play was launched in 1976. Yeah. So the first choreo poem goes to Insaki Shange, and I have a personal connection to it because even at the initial reading of Brown Boy Mad at Fisk University, I gave each of the actors a different color folder to represent, pay homage to For Color Girls. In For Color Girls, if you haven't seen it, each of the women wears a different color that represents kind of their color of the rainbow and what they're experiencing. And I echoed that by having each of the actors hold a different color folder. So anyway, that's just another personal moment, another personal connection to some bit of history. Oh, and by the way, I do have show and tell. This is Brown Boy Mad. Oh, let me make it bigger. This is Brown Boy Mad, my play, being performed at Fisk University a couple days ago. A couple days ago, the drama teacher, Professor Fincher, sent this to me. These are the Fisk stage crafters. I produced, well, produce is a strong word, but we created 2 staged readings of my play, Brown Boy Mad, right before the pandemic in, what was that, 2020? Yeah, right before the pandemic really took hold. And this is a new version of the play Brown Boy Mad that's happening right now at Fisk University. And the play, in case you haven't heard me talk about it, is essentially an autobiographical play about some of my experiences with race and racism during my life. Ironically, none of the things that I've talked about today are in the play, and I might need to make some updates. But it's fascinating to me how the play has grown under the watchful eye of Fisk University and the Fisk University stage crafters. And as you see, or maybe you can't tell, but there are women on stage too. It's not just men, as I expected it to be, since it's autobiographical and it's my story. So interesting things going on at Fisk University. And that is a shout out to Fisk. It's also a shout out to Ntozake Shange for creating the term choreo poem. Okay, so moving on. So I'm going to jump to another experience. In high school, I was one of 12 students selected to travel to Cairo, Egypt, to study at the American University in Cairo. I was studying and speaking Arabic at the time, and I was one of 2 Black men that was selected for that trip. And I remember hanging out with these 2 guys. One was Caucasian. The other guy was he was of color. I can't quite remember his heritage. Anyway, I was talking to them, and at some point, a few days into the trip, they told me that they'd never met a Black person before. And I was like, what? Like, how was that even possible? And they were explaining in the ensuing conversation that they've seen Black people, they've interacted with Black people, like in stores, at, restaurants, etc. But they'd never really had a conversation, person to person, with a Black person before. And that really struck me that was possible, because for the average African American, it's not possible for us to not interact with the larger society. That's not possible. Like, every once in a while, if you go to an HBCU, as I did, I graduated from Morehouse College, and my mom graduated from Fisk University, and many other people in our family did as well. You can kind of live in a bubble to some degree, but not really. I mean, the world, United States at least, is predominantly white, and the idea that these 2 young men could exist without having any significant interaction with a Black person was shocking to me. And it also immediately adjusted my behavior. Like, not that I was doing anything wrong, but it just made me think, okay, if I am the only Black man that they've interacted with, I want to make sure that I don't reinforce any of the stereotypes that are associated with Black men. Like it gave me an extra level of pressure I felt to to be myself, but also be mindful that these men are going to go back into their various corners of the world, and to a large degree, their perceptions of Black men will be affected by my interacting with them. That was a lot of pressure for a high school kid. That's what it felt like to me, at least. So anyway, I hope I represented myself well, and it definitely didn't hurt that I was on that trip. I was one of those 12 students, and that I was at the time fluent in Arabic. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, I'm not really sure how this is all coming together as I speak these things aloud. I think I just wanted to make Black History Month more personal for me, and I hope for you too. And maybe make the point that it's essentially a mindset shift. Like the reason for the month, the reason for Black History Month, in my opinion, is to create a mindset shift. A mindset shift, as in, this is not some time to just pay homage to people from the past and lift them up. It's also a time to shift our mindsets about what's happening now and how we can move forward. I mentioned that I've screened my film Test Driving While Black on the New Thought Media Network a couple of times. And the first time was actually Black History Month a year ago. And as a result of that, I've been asked by some allies to do some screenings, and that's been interesting. And what I often get asked in those spaces is how allies can help, what allies can do. And essentially, my answer is, well, two things. Change your mindset. Don't think of it as something that happened before and that we don't need to address now. But also take small actions. Take small actions. Observe things a little differently. Observe things a little differently. Thinking of it as a present tense challenge, I think, engenders itself to thinking of different ways you might interpret what's happening around you. There's a story, I think I got this from Rev Melissa, but there's a story, for example, about two women who were going through a checkout line at a grocery store. And the white woman went through the checkout line first and paid by check, no problems. And she was still gathering her groceries at the end of the counter when the Black woman behind her tried to pay by check, and the clerk challenged the Black woman, asked her for ID, and many other things to verify who she was. And so the white woman turned around to say, "Why did you ask that woman for all those things? Because you didn't ask me for all those things." And just that shifted the entire situation. Just her asking the question, because there's often this perception that if we ask the questions, that we're being too sensitive, we're being hypersensitive, or we're misinterpreting the situation. But if in that case, that woman had shifted her mindset enough to be perceptive, to be aware of inconsistencies, let's call it that, in behavior, in treatment around her, and just used her voice just by asking a simple question, and that shifted everything. So I say all that to say that is one of the most effective ways to move the needle. Don't think about it as something that needs to happen in Washington, like a policy change, or nonprofits need to handle it. Yeah, all that stuff needs to happen, but person to person, that's the most impactful thing. That's the most impactful action you could take, is just saying something from when you see something. To use that, well, they have that on the subway. Say, if you see something, say something. And then maybe that's appropriate. If you see something and you're able to shift your perception of it, then that could make a difference in the situation around you. So I hope that kind of came together in some kind of way. I think my general point was to personalized Black History Month, to talk about some of the things that have happened to me in my lifetime. And obviously, you can see much more of what's happened to me in my lifetime by checking out my play, Brown Boy Mad. You can just go to my website. Oh, I'll put that up, sekouwrites.com, to see more about how to see Brown Boy Mad and experience it. And I'm actually working on a book, yes, but more like a script, kind of. I am intending to publish the script of Brown Boy Mad, because some people who have watched the play have been confused in parts about what was being said. So it's my intention to publish a book. And now that I've said that out loud, I've made myself accountable to doing that. So you can just go to my website and you can find out more about the play. And again, I hope this connected for you. I'm not sure, but again, my intention was to not think of Black History Month as something off and away and on a pedestal somewhere, but to make it personal and to talk about some of the stories that I know of and some of the things that have happened to me, so that we can know that it is a present tense challenge, thinking about the different ways that African Americans are treated, even today, and that it's something that we can all address together. Yeah, I hope that connected. All right. Like I said, I was taking a page from Reverend Mel's book and just hitting the record button and going for it. So please, send me some comments, send me some DMs, and let me know if this connected. Maybe I'll do some more with it. But in the meantime, check out my website so you can check out the play. It's funny, and what's the word that was used to describe it? It's not aggressive. I guess I'll put it that way. It tends to be lighthearted, but also very informative. So check it out and enjoy. I hope you enjoyed your Black History Month. Tomorrow is the last day of February. I hope you got something good out of this Black History Month. And let's see, you will see me again on my own show, the Be Your Own Hero show, Monday through Friday, 9:45 a.m. Eastern. You'll see Rev Mel again, also Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern for Sip with Rev Melissa. And all that said, I think you need to keep doing. Be a hero. Be your own hero. Remember that now is better than perfect. And I'll see you mañana on Monday. Later.